It was just another cold night in the city, full of youthful energy, loud music, hopes, and dreams. But it would set the stage for the last 24 hours of Chicago street assassin K.I. on April 11th, 2014, at about 3:30 p.m. The headlines that shook the windy streets of Chicago showed that Gakira Barnes, one of the deadliest assassins on the streets of Tookaville, had just been shot dead at 6400 block of South Eberhard Avenue. For her friends and family, it was like an invincible being had dropped dead, but for ops, a thorn in their sight had dropped dead. Who was K.I.? The news of K.I.'s death shook the world so much that even those who didn't know her before her death heard about her. It shot up commentary on gun violence, gang violence, and street wars. But who was Gakira Barnes, known in the streets as K.I. at 17? Gakira Barnes became a legendary figure in social media. She was nicknamed Lil Snoop by one of her friends, drawing inspiration from the TV show The Wire, where a fictional female assassin shared the same moniker. In the online sphere, K.I. was portrayed as a fierce and determined young woman, unyielding and fearless. She had gained notoriety for allegedly seeking vengeance for her slain friends, with claims of committing at least 2 killings before reaching the age of 14. Disturbing photos began surfacing on Instagram after her untimely death on April 11, 2014. These images depicted her brandishing an assortment of firearms, encapsulating her dual identity as a young girl and a reputed shooter. One senior member of her gang, the Flyboy Gang, tweeted, "I only FW K.I. cause she do what you scared to do." This statement epitomized the admiration and respect she garnered from her peers. However, despite her reputation, K.I. had never been convicted of a serious crime and had never been named a suspect in any shooting. Chantel Brown, K.I.'s mother, acknowledges that her daughter was not an angel, but she wants the world to know that there was more to her than the image portrayed on social media. In her eyes, K.I. was a beautiful and beloved girl who cherished spending time with her mother, listening to music, and sharing laughter. Brown shares a photo of her daughter wearing a cap and gown, taken on the day she graduated from the Charter Perspective IT Math and Science Academy, symbolizing her dreams of a brighter future for herself and her family. She didn't bother anyone unless they bothered her. She always was respectable and mannerable, Brown said, countering the over-sensationalized image of her daughter as nothing but a gangster. But alas, Gakira ended up being a product of a dysfunctional environment. The early tragedy of K.I.'s life was marked by the loss of her father in 1997, who was fatally shot when she was just an infant. Growing up without him may have fostered a sense of self-reliance in her, as well as a deep desire to protect those close to her from harm. Brown explains she just wanted to protect everybody with her lil self. As K.I. entered her teenage years, she gravitated towards a group of young men from her neighborhood in Woodlawn, Chicago. They called themselves the St. Lawrence Boys, or the Flyboy Gang. Among them was Shondale Tuka Gregory, a 15-year-old who was tragically killed while waiting for a bus in January 2011. In honor of Gregory, the group renamed themselves the Tuka Gang, and their neighborhood became known as Tookaville. K.I. adopted the Facebook name Tookaville Kira to pay homage to her fallen friend. Several months later, the death of a 20-year-old rival gang member named O.D. Perry shook the community. Online accounts suggested that K.I. had been the hitter responsible for the killing, although the police never identified her as a suspect. One said, "LOL, so O.D. was killed by a girl, SS mate, shaking my head." The opposing gang retaliated by christening their territory O-Block, and tensions escalated further. In November 2011, the Tuka gang experienced another loss when Carlton Tutu Archer was fatally shot. K.I. posted a photo on social media with her hands clasped in prayer, paying tribute to her fallen comrade. However, the most profound impact on K.I. seemed to come from the murder of her close friend and cousin, 13-year-old Tyquan Tyler. It was after Tyquan's death that K.I.'s online presence began to intensify, and her reputation as a fierce and vengeful figure grew. Devastated by his death, she changed her social media handles to Tyquan Assassin and formed a subset of Tookaville called Tyquan World, consisting of younger gang members. Under Gakira's guidance, Tyquan World became notorious for their violent actions, targeting rival gangs while she focused on high-profile targets. The conflict escalated, with the gangs engaging in online disrespect and insults, worsening the situation. A real war was underway, with no end in sight. K.I.'s social media accounts, particularly her Twitter handle, became platforms where she expressed her grief, anger, and loyalty to her fallen friends. She posted tweets about seeking revenge and made references to her involvement in street activities. Her followers saw her as a symbol of strength and resistance, while others saw her as a troubling example of the violence that plagued Chicago's neighborhoods. The circumstances surrounding K.I.'s own death on April 11, 2014 remain shrouded in mystery, but there is a clear path from the cycle of violence, K.I.'s past, and the tweets that led her to the grave. Some reports suggest that she was caught in the crossfire of a gang-related shooting, while others claim she was deliberately targeted. The truth may never be fully known, but her death sent shockwaves through the community. After her death, debates arose about the nature of KI's online persona and social media's role in perpetuating the cycle of violence. Some argued that her online presence was a reflection of the harsh reality she faced growing up in a dangerous environment, while others saw it as a glorification of violence and a perpetuation of gang culture. While official police records implicated her in 3 to 5 shootings, including murder, the streets whispered of a much higher tally, with murmurs suggesting she may have been responsible for at least 17 incidents. But funny enough, there's a tiny possibility that it was all smoke and mirrors, bravado as a survival tactic. I mean, I didn't know her personally. I can only speak to how she portrayed herself. Regardless of the interpretations, KI's story is a stark reminder of the challenges many young people face growing up in neighborhoods plagued by gang violence. Ultimately, Gakira Barnes represents a tragic narrative of a young girl caught in the crossfire of Chicago's gang conflicts. So to answer the question, who was KI? She was both the sweet little girl who went to a charter school and the terror of the streets, who put fear and bullets into the hearts of grown men. Now that I've explained the general idea of who KI was, I'll be diving deeper into the events surrounding the deaths of Tuka, OD, and Taekwon, Lil B, the tortured feud between the GDs and BDs, and how they affected the last 24 hours of Chicago Street Assassin. KI years leading up to KI's death, a life full of loss. As you may know, Tuka, a young man from the STL EBT sets on 63rd Street, met a tragic end as a teenager, giving rise to the name Tookaville for the area. However, his death was not an isolated incident, but rather the culmination of a long-standing feud brewing for years. The roots of this feud can be traced back to the high school days of the involved parties. What started as simple schoolyard fights between members from opposing areas soon escalated into deadly violence as they grew older and acquired firearms. Prominent figures like King Von openly displayed their affiliation with the BD gang on social media, demonstrating their loyalty to the blocks of Parkway and their gang. He even named an album, Welcome to O Block. The WICC City BD set included notable members such as HK, J Money, T-Roy, OD, Platoon, Trey 5, Boss Money, Duke, Sheroid Reezy, Big A, and Boss Top. The STL EBT GD crew consisted of members like KI, FBG Duck, Lil B, Lil Doc, Boss Trell, Tuka, Wooski, FBG Brick, FBG Butter, and Lil J. The fire that further fueled the war and strained the relationship between these two gangs was the tragic murder of Tuka in January 2011 at the 600 block on 63rd Street. It was a turning point. He was shot in the chest and fell to the ground, where the assailant approached him and fired 3 more shots into his body before fleeing. This loss deeply affected FBG Duck and KI, leading to further tensions between STL, EBT, and O Block. The opposing faction quickly started disrespecting Tuka. Diss tracks targeting Tookaville were released, such as Lil Durk and King Von's Still Trappin', where the lyrics made derogatory references to the deceased. This ain't OG, this just smoking this shit. Thrax for real, this that Thrax for real, this that shit that have you choking and it got Tuka killed. It got Tuka killed, Even popular rapper Chief Keef popularized the phrase smoking on Tuka and continued to disrespect Tuka.
Tuka. Tuka. You shot Tuka? Say Tuka, man.
This disrespect extended beyond songs and spilled onto social media, intensifying the online feuds between the gangs. But Tuka's mom, Dominique Boyd, wasn't happy with it. She said, "My son had nothing to do with nothing in this rap industry. He didn't even know how to beatbox, let alone bust a lyric for a rap." But they didn't stop. Death threats were exchanged, and the deceased friends of each side were disrespected, further fueling the violence. KI, deeply affected by the disrespect shown towards Tuka, began training for revenge. She learned shooting from her cousin named Boss Trell and was mentored in street life by C-Ball, who was in her gang. The ongoing conflict between O-Block and Tookaville shaped the legacies of King Von, FBG Duck, KI, and their crews. Their personal tragedies, territorial disputes, and thirst for vengeance influenced the development of Chicago's drill culture. Each name associated with the feud represented sacrifice and loyalty, and KI's alleged involvement as a shooter would play a significant role in her career. After Tuka's death, the focus shifted to OD Perry, a member of the BD gang. OD was allegedly the shooter who killed Tuka as payback for the murder of a BD called Edric Walker. In the wake of the devastating loss of Tuka, KI found herself consumed by a seething anger fueled by the cruel mockery she faced on social media. On Tuka's birthday on August 10th, 2011, Gakira and the gang celebrated, fueled by adrenaline. They decided it was the right time for revenge. Gakira and another member spotted OD Perry, and shots were fired, resulting in his death. Gakira was suspected of firing the fatal shot, thus perpetuating the cycle of violence and deepening the wounds of grief. The narrative spun by the streets was that after taking OD's life, Gakira brazenly seized his firearm, proudly exhibiting it in a video shared on social media. Her actions were marked by an unyielding coldness and brutality, a product of her tumultuous environment. As word spread about Gakira's alleged involvement, she gained a reputation as a shooter, even though some members of the rival gang initially found it hard to believe that a teenage girl could be responsible. In the depths of pain, K.I. knew all too well the sting of loss. But destiny had another tragic blow in store for her, again shattering her world. This time it was the loss of a young boy who held a special place in her heart, Taekwon Tyler. Their bond, like that of siblings, was unbreakable, despite being cousins. At this point, you already know this because I've mentioned it already in this video. But the impact of his death is more profound than you realize, especially when you find out that it was a case of being at the wrong place at the wrong time. What made it even more heart-wrenching was that Taekwon had managed to escape the dangerous neighborhood. His mom, desperate to shield him from the violence, had moved to Illinois. But the allure of Chicago proved too strong for Taekwon, drawing him back time and again. On one fateful occasion, he begged his mom to let him go to a house party on South Rhodes Avenue's 6,200 block. Reluctantly, she agreed on the condition that she would be there to pick him up later. Little did they know that this night would mark the end of Taekwon's journey. As the party gradually fizzled out and the crowd began to disperse, an unexpected altercation erupted among a group of men, escalating into the thunderous crackle of gunfire. Nothing particularly surprising for the neighborhoods, but this time it would hit an unsuspecting assailant. In the chaos, a single bullet found its tragic mark, piercing through young Taekwon's chest. His mother arrived at the scene early, only to be confronted with the unimaginable sight of her beloved son bleeding on the cold sidewalk. With pain unimaginable and cradling him in her arms, she witnessed his final breath escape his lips, a moment that would forever haunt her. It was during this heart-rending spectacle that K.I. stood witness, burdened with overwhelming grief. She saw before her the lifeless body of an innocent boy who had simply sought to enjoy himself with his friends. Filled with sorrow, K.I. took to Twitter to pay her respects. In one tweet, she said, "Taekwon, I just want to smoke one more blunt with you, hit one more stain and split it with you." There was a rumor that claimed that K.I. had introduced Taekwon to the dark world of guns, gangs, and robberies. Allegedly, one of these dealers, nursing deep-seated resentment, used guns and bullets for vengeance, leading to the tragic demise of young Taekwon. Luckily, a man named Nasian Flowers was apprehended, put on trial, and ultimately sentenced to 55 years behind bars for his role in the murder. Taekwon's untimely death left K.I. shattered, yet it ignited an unyielding flame of determination within her, a resolve to make the streets bleed in her brother's memory. Something inside K.I. had broken with his passing, unleashing a fury that ultimately consumed her. As the online battles raged on, K.I. and her Taekwon world comrades were relentless in their pursuit of revenge. Their actions were fueled by a burning desire to avenge the deaths of Tuka, Odie Perry, and Taekwon. They sought to strike fear into the hearts of their rivals and establish themselves as a force to be reckoned with. But to what end? Years leading up to K.I.'s death, war on the streets. As time passed, K.I.'s notoriety as a shooter continued to grow. Her reputation as a fearless and lethal member of the STL EBT gang spread throughout Chicago. She became a symbol of resilience and destruction, almost like an unrelenting goddess of the streets. However, the path of vengeance is a treacherous one, and it often leads to bloodshed and tragedy. In the midst of the escalating violence, K.I.'s life took another tragic turn when she engaged in a shootout on October 9th, 2012, with King Von, with whom she had a love-hate relationship. One minute he's in love with her, the next minute they're both planning a shootout against each other, a 21st century love story for real. On that fateful day of October 9th, in the company of FBG Cash, K.I. boldly confronted King Von and T-Roy, seizing the opportunity for a shootout. Amid the chaos, shots were fired, and King Von was struck in the leg. Surprisingly, both King Von and T-Roy managed to survive the attack. In the aftermath of the incident, King Von took to social media, seemingly making light of the situation and asserting his bravery. He jokingly mentioned being shot, saying, "LOL, a leg shot, then what?" but also made it clear that it would not result in a truce between him and K.I. T-Roy, on the other hand, was not in a joking mood, expressing a strong desire for retribution with a tweet that read, "I'm gonna kill this." Undeterred by the potential consequences, K.I. continued targeting of O'Block. For instance, she shot T-Roy's female cousin, but no charges were ever brought against her for the incident. After a life of profound loss, particularly the death of Taekwon, K.I. underwent a transformation and created Taekwon World, composed mainly of the gang's youngest members. Among the members were 0078, Poppy, TB, and Richie Jerk. Taekwon World swiftly gained a fearsome reputation, leaving behind a trail of casualties as they sought vengeance against rival factions. K.I. K.I. set her sights on more prominent adversaries, showing no mercy to anyone who stood in her way. In K.I.'s eyes, she had become something of a vigilante, engaged in an unending war, where collateral damage was an inevitable reality. One of the most notorious incidents during this period was the murder of Lil Jojo, a young rapper associated with the gang BDK, Black Disciples Killers. Lil Jojo, whose real name was Joseph Coleman, had been involved in the ongoing feud between Tookaville and O'Block. On September 4th, 2012, while riding a bike, he was shot and killed in a drive-by shooting. The death of Lil Jojo sparked outrage and further fueled the animosity between the rival gangs. The incident received widespread media attention and highlighted the grim reality of gang violence in Chicago. The city's streets had become a war zone, and the lives of young individuals were being cut short in a never-ending cycle of revenge and bloodshed. Throughout this period, K.I. and her Taekwon World associates continued their reign of terror, exacting revenge on their rivals and leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. A mix of grief and anger drove their actions, and a desire to assert their dominance in the gang hierarchy. But as the body count continued to rise, the toll of the violence became increasingly evident. Families mourned the loss of their loved ones, neighborhoods were torn apart, and a sense of despair settled over the city. Amidst the chaos and devastation, there were voices of dissent and calls for change. Activists, community leaders, and concerned citizens sought to address the root causes of the violence and provide alternatives to the gang lifestyle. They recognized that the ongoing feud between Tookaville and O'Block was not just a battle between two factions, but a symptom of deeper social issues plaguing Chicago's marginalized communities. Still, the war persisted. Boss Trell, a prominent figure within the Tookaville community and close homie of K.I., found himself at the top of O'Block's hit list. He was widely believed to be the perpetrator behind the tragic deaths of two revered O-Block members. One such victim was Devin Varner, affectionately known as D. Thang, whose life was brutally taken on September 13th, 2011. In the early hours of November 8th, 2012, a grim discovery was made in an alley along West 83rd Street. The lifeless form of Boss Trell lay motionless. His future was cut tragically short. According to accounts, it appeared that Boss Trell had ventured beyond the boundaries of Tookaville, maybe seeking to meet his girlfriend. However, fate had a cruel twist in store for him. As he arrived at his intended destination, he found himself in the middle of a carefully planned trap, orchestrated by O'Block. Reports indicate that 3 individuals, J Money, T Roy, and King Von, were the agents of death who confronted Boss Trell on that fateful morning. They were armed, their intentions malevolent, and ready to kill. The loss of Boss Trell, someone K.I. held dear, devastated her deeply and led her to harbor more resentment toward O'Block. But it didn't stop K.I. from being K.I. A good example of who K.I. was and how ruthless she was the death of J Money. On a fateful Monday on September 2nd, 2013, J Money fell into K.I.'s trap while trying to meet a girl. Realizing he was being set up, J Money attempted to flee, but he was mercilessly shot multiple times. Without delay, Gakira took to social media and boasted about her involvement in the violent act, proudly proclaiming her ability to shoot people in the head. This was more or less retaliation for the death of Boss Trell. Unfortunately, death would visit Gakira once again. This time, it wasn't the rival gangs who took a life, but the police. A massive police presence flooded the streets after a police-involved shooting on Eberhard and Rhodes on 63rd.
A deadly shootout in the middle of a Chicago street. In the middle of the morning, a suspect allegedly pulls a gun on police who fired fatal shot.
Friends say 19-year-old Rasan Shaw had just left them to get something to eat.
Rashawn Shaw, also known as Lil B, was shot 7 times by law enforcement. Lil B's demise shook Gakira and the community to her core, and at his funeral, she crumbled under the weight of her grief.
He was running through the alley with no gun or nothing, because he just left us, so we know he ain't had no gun. The police shot him unjustified.
Consumed by pain, Gakira desired for her enemies to suffer. Each act of violence causes the next act of violence. As the story unfolded, Gakira's life took a dark turn. Her heartache and thirst for vengeance led her down the path of becoming a cold-blooded assassin. While rumors swirled about her involvement in planned murders, no concrete evidence emerged, and she remained elusive, avoiding legal consequences for her actions. Little did she know Lil B's death would be what pushed her above the edge. K.I.'s last kill would trigger a cascade of pain. But for you to understand the profound impact this war had on K.I., you have to understand how deep the rot of gang war was entrenched in K.I.'s reality. The last 24 hours of Chicago Street Assassin, K.I. At the funeral of Lil B, K.I.'s spirit reached her breaking point. Overwhelmed by grief, She yearned to inflict suffering upon her enemies, particularly Chief Keef, who had distanced himself from the violent streets of Chicago and found success as a rapper in Los Angeles. Although Chief Keef had left Chicago, he still had family ties within the city, and K.I. saw this as an opportunity. On April 10th, 2014, a day before K.I.'s demise, tragedy struck. Mario Hess, also known as Blood Money and Chief Keef's cousin, was seated in front of his family's home in West Englewood when an unknown gunman approached and unleashed a barrage of bullets on him. This was a sad end for Blood Money because just a fortnight before his untimely demise, Blood Money had signed a record deal with Interscope Records, but sadly being affiliated with the wrong crowd ended him. K.I. boldly claimed responsibility for Blood Money's death, yet even the downfall of her enemies couldn't mend her broken heart. Seeking solace, she turned to social media to express her anguish, recounting her losses and the friends she had mourned. She even shared her thoughts about her absent father, acknowledging how her life might have been different had he been present. At around 10:35 p.m. on the 10th of April 2014, Gakira began reminiscing about Taekwon. She said, thinking about the first time Lil Taekwon got some see my lil bro was happy asshole. Wooski sends a tweet to Gakira asking where she's at, and Gakira responds to him at around 11:01 a.m., says she is on her way and asks him where he is. At 11:03 a.m., Wooski responds that he's on his way to the block. Then Gakira tweets at 11:04 a.m., "R.I.P. BT, happy birthday, Kuzo." BT is Boss Trell, who allegedly died at the hands of J Money, T-Roy, and King Von. Later on, at around 11:10 a.m., Ian Miss Parker and Tutu Gang TB DMs K.I. and wishes Boss Trell a happy birthday. At 11:36 a.m., the biggest mistake of her life happens. She tweets out her location, 6,347 TMB, with a devil emoji. This sealed her own fate. She had sent out her exact location for all to see, including her enemies. Walking along the 6,400 block of South Eberhart with her homies, Spoon from Gyro City and FBG Butter to Wooski's residence to commemorate Boss Trell's birthday. Suddenly, a vehicle pulls up and a gunman emerges. Boom, shots fired.
It's still under investigation what exactly happened Friday afternoon in the 6,400 block of South Eberhart, but neighbors say Barnes and a friend were walking along the sidewalk when a gunman started firing.
Her two friends suffered gunshot wounds, one in the foot and the other in the knee. As for K.I., she endured 9 bullet wounds to her chest, neck, and jaw.
When the bullet hit, it was so powerful, she fell on the step. In the jaw, in the neck, and in the chest, and in the leg. 9 times, they said.
Despite being critically injured, she managed to stagger towards a nearby house, where she collapsed upon the steps, exhaling her final breath. She was found and rushed to Northwestern Hospital, but ultimately lost her life. News of K.I.'s demise spread, and her enemies took to social media to revel in their perceived victory and celebrate her downfall. But people like her mother would have to live with her daughter's death.
I'm just gonna miss her presence. She was a very, very beautiful, well-known, lovely girl. And I'm gonna fight for her to have justice, because I don't think it's fair that we're losing our kids being gunned down every day in the streets.
In Tookaville, a thirst for vengeance consumed them as they believed the time for retribution had arrived. After K.I. was murdered, more violence swept through the streets of Southside Chicago. This caused 36 individuals to be shot and 4 lives to be lost within a mere 36 hours. There are 2 main suspects in the tragic killing of K.I., each with their unique circumstances surrounding them. The first suspect was Tron Young, also known as Big A from O-Block, who brazenly admitted his connection to the crime online, even going so far as to change his social media name to Big Asky, meaning Ask K.I. But fate took a sinister turn for Big A in the early hours of December 4th, 2016, as he met his untimely demise when a fatal gunshot pierced his face at Sammy's Grill on South King Drive. While some say that this incident bore no connection to K.I.'s murder, others speculate that it could have been a retaliatory act carried out by members of Tookaville, including DeAndre Wallace, known as Can't Get Right, and George Barnes, known as G.I. Joe, who coincidentally happened to be K.I.'s brother. The second primary suspect implicated in the investigation into K.I.'s killing was none other than King Von himself. On April 24th, 2014, King Von was apprehended and held for questioning. Despite being released due to insufficient evidence, his newfound freedom was short-lived, as he was subsequently arrested on unrelated charges. He got released, but became a bit famous for his music, but before he could truly bloom, his environment caught up with him. He ended up getting killed, but that is a story for another day. But still, still, the streets still believe King Von is responsible. Perhaps the most surreal event of the date of K.I.'s murder was her tweet saying, "In the end, we die," so close to when she was murdered, and another tweet saying, "I do what I do because I know God got a day for me." We cannot truly know why K.I. did the things she did on the day of her death. Maybe she wanted them to know her location. Maybe she wanted the gunmen to come so she could fight. Maybe she felt invincible and flew too close to the sun like Icarus. Or maybe the tweet had no deep meaning, and it was just a juvenile tweet from a hot-headed young girl. The last hours of K.I. are a culmination of everything she's been through. The loss of Boss Trell, Tuka, Taekwon, Lil B, and the gang violence that she found herself in, all meeting at a point on the 11th of April 2014 to end her life. Thanks for watching. Click on the videos you see on the screen for more.